You are watching Lunchtime Agenda, and joining me now on the program is the Shadow Parliamentary Secretary Amanda Rishworth, joining us from Adelaide, and from our Sydney studio, David Coleman, the Liberal MP from Western Sydney, the seat of Banks. Thank you very much for joining us, to both of you. I want to start with you, David Coleman. Just a response we heard from Joel Fitzgibbon in the first half of the show about farm assistance. As a City MP who's been told by your leader that there's no more handouts for industry, are you happy for your constituents to pay, if you like, for assistance for farmers?
Yeah, well, I think farming is obviously affected by drought and by what is effectively a form of a natural an act of God, like flood or like bushfire, and it's very difficult for farmers to prepare for those events. We spend a very small amount on farming assistance relative to other OECD nations, and I think most Australians accept that in times of serious drought it is appropriate for there to be some assistance, and obviously the Prime Minister and the Agriculture Minister are addressing those issues at the moment. But yes, I think people in my electorate would accept that some level of assistance is appropriate.
Amanda Rishworth, you're underwater in Adelaide today.
Well, it's certainly not drought here in Adelaide today, but look, drought is a serious issue for our farmers, and that is why I am really concerned that Tony Abbott and Barnaby Joyce have actually no plan. The only thing they have on the table is to bring forward some assistance for 6 months, but there's no more money on the table. Indeed, they've abolished the vehicle, the COAG vehicle, to actually address this issue. So, quite frankly, I think there's a lot of explaining to do from the government about what their plan is. Now, of course, we've got Barnaby Joyce that beats his chest. Well, he said when it came to SBC, he would go in fighting, and look how that turned out. So I'd like to see a plan from the government, and hopefully Barnaby Joyce is a bit more successful than he was with SPC.
After this weekend, after the Prime Minister sees firsthand some of those drought-affected regions. Moving on to jobs more generally, unemployment figures out yesterday showing that, well, unemployment now has a 6 in front of it. Now, that is not unexpected. It is a lag indicator as well, and no surprise, I suppose, as a result of that Joe Hockey blamed Labor for this. But David Coleman, can you name a date, for example, when the government will start to take full responsibility for things like jobs figures and the economy?
Well, look, I think a couple of points on this, David. I mean, firstly, under Labor, unemployment went up by 200,000 people, and we lost 1 in 10 manufacturing jobs in the entire nation. So it's a bit rich for Labor to be espousing that it's the pro Jobs Party, given that record. Now, in terms of getting the economy moving again and getting the unemployment rate down, we've got a very clear agenda to do that. We want to abolish the carbon tax to get business, to get costs off business. We want to abolish the mining tax. We want to get the ABCC re-established to really increase productivity in the construction industry. But on each of those measures, we're being opposed by the Labor Party. I mean, Labor senators are on a go slow put in place by Bill Shorten, and that's having a very significant effect. We need to get rid of those bad taxes in particular to help get the economy moving. And of course also we have a range of areas where we've given more than 100 environmental approvals for significant projects, and those will start to come online in the coming months.
Amanda Rishworth, unemployment did start rising under Labor, and Treasury did predict that it would go up and will go up even further to 6.25% sometime in the near future. And that happened, those predictions, those forecasts happened while you were in government. Why then is Labor so surprised and so upset at the figures out today? And why won't Labor, in the coalition's eyes, get out of the way and allow the repeal of the mining tax and the carbon tax?
Well, let's be really clear. Labor acted to actually save jobs during the global financial crisis, and indeed it was the coalition that did try and block that unsuccessfully. But it is the government who, in the election campaign, with all the information, said we will create 1 million jobs. Indeed, since they've been in government, 63 100,000 full-time jobs have left this economy. So for a government that beat its chest and said, we will create these jobs, that is not the record. But more than that, we've seen them willfully ignore actually working with business to actually assist them. Whether it's the automotive industry, whether it's SBC, they are working against jobs, unless you're Cabras, of course.
Scrapping the carbon tax will help business, though.
Well, look, what will actually help business is a government with a plan, increasing productivity, which is key. Of course, one of the key productivity measures is rolling out the NBN. The Coalition is scrapping that. Of course, what we have seen from this government is absolutely no plan. They said that the automotive industry would inevitably leave this country, but they didn't have a plan for it. They don't have any plan when it comes to South Australia and the impact the death of the motor industry will have here. This government is just flying around.
Well, look, David, I might just jump in there if that's okay. I mean, we have a very clear plan. I mean, the problem is that Labor is blocking our plan. So carbon tax, mining tax, environmental approvals to get those projects up and running again. And what about over-regulation? I mean, 21,000 new regulations under Labor. We're going to get rid of a whole lot of those in the coming days.
What do you think an increase in the company tax, which your paid parental levy is going to do to business? That slaps on a increase in, I think it's 1.5%, as well as drawing on general revenue. What is that going to do to business? What will happen to small business now that you've got rid... No, hang on, let me finish. That you got rid of the small business instant asset write-off. What do you think that does?
Well, let me address the question on company tax.
A quick response and then we'll move on.
Sure. Look, I mean, what we're doing is we're bringing the company tax rate down to 28.5%.
And then putting it back up.
And a relatively small number of companies will pay that levy to underwrite what's a very important scheme in the paid parental leave scheme and end up at 30%, which is where they are today. So it's
very hard to justify
to say that there is a
increasing
company tax increase.
Let's move on, guys. Let's move on to Qantas and assistance from the government for the national carrier. It looks most likely that a debt guarantee may be put forward. The government, though, still keen on relaxing the Sales Act. This was the Prime Minister on radio this morning, followed by the opposition leader.
Qantas have been shackled by legislative restrictions that were put in place by the Labor Party back in the 1990s, and I think it would be perfectly appropriate to unshackle Qantas. So, yes, let's have a level playing field for Qantas. Let's not have Qantas competing with Virgin and others with one hand tied behind its back. But I do have to say that there is no free ride on the taxpayer for private companies.
The Abbott government's got to stop playing hide and seek with their policies. Why don't they, in the interest of Australia, sit down with the Labor opposition and work through what we can agree on, rather than simply doing backgrounding and leaks and not telling anyone what's going on about anything?
Amanda Rishworth, why should Tony Abbott sit down with the opposition when the opposition has already made clear it will block any attempts to relax foreign investment rules for Qantas? Well, look,
we've been really clear that we believe Qantas should remain our national carrier and remain owned by majority owned by Australian interests. But quite frankly, what we're seeing here today is Tony Abbott's saying one thing, Joe Hockey saying another. In fact, from Joe Hockey, we've seen a range of proposals floated with no detail, no substance. The government.
But how do you go to the negotiating table if you've already put down a position very firmly and the government has the opposite position? Shouldn't you approach that with an open mind?
Well, look, we've said from day dot, the Leader of the Opposition from day dot said that he wanted to work with the government when it came to Qantas, explore all options, rather than just putting up thought bubbles and putting up ideas, which indeed sometimes contradict each other, from the government. Put together a proposal. We'll work with them to look at what we think we can work with and what we don't. But I think it is really important that Tony Abbott is saying that he doesn't want the national carrier to be Qantas anymore. He doesn't want a national carrier. But look, let's see what other proposals are out there, and we're willing to work with him on this one.
David Coleman, why doesn't Tony Abbott sit down with the opposition?
Well, based on previous experience, David, you wouldn't expect a great result from that sort of a process. I mean, I think on Qantas, the issue is that Qantas is restricted by the Qantas Sale Act, as you know, and so it can't take in foreign capital beyond the 49% limit, and that does make it more difficult for Qantas to compete. So I think what the
So would you be happy for Qantas to be run by a foreign company?
Well, I think what the PM's flagging is that we need to consider all of these issues in the context of Qantas and sit down with the airline and come to a sensible conclusion. But I think the key point on Qantas is it does have an act of legislation which makes its things more difficult for it than pretty much every other company in Australia.
Okay, just 90 seconds or so left on the program. I just want to get both your thoughts on Nick Minchin, who's been appointed the Consul General in New York, posting that'll start in April. David Coleman, he was a crucial figure in getting rid of Malcolm Turnbull as leader of your party. Is this a thank you present from Tony Abbott?
Oh, look, I think that, Nick Minchin was the finance minister, and what do you do as the Consul General in New York? You talk to the investment banks and investors in New York and you encourage them to invest in Australia. And his experience as finance minister is absolutely perfect for that role. So I think it's a great appointment and very much looking forward to him taking it up.
That makes sense, doesn't it, Amanda Rishworth?
Oh, well, look, what we're seeing from the government is real hypocrisy on this issue. Senator George Brandis said that Steve Bracks should be sacked because he had no obvious qualifications being Premier of the state of Victoria. We now see him appoint a Liberal power broker in which he qualified it today, saying that he was a well-respected Liberal Party member. So I think what we're seeing is hypocrisy from the government, but importantly, this mess has led to that position not being filled for 5 months. It is a very important position, and of course, because of the hypocrisy and the partisanship from the Liberal government, what we've seen is that position be vacant.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Amanda Rishworth, David Coleman, thank you so much for your thoughts on Lunchtime Agenda today.
Thanks, David.
And